But another one of my models of the journey of humanity. Look at it this way, a kind of progression that has gone on from, this is just one, of course, of many that I could come up with, and even other people, but look at it as being a progression of nature, like the weather, the crops, but nature as being the center of human life. Look at it going from that, in this particular model, to the tribe, the family, that is, other humans being the center of human activity, to the guides, religions, being the center of human activity, to the state being the center of human activity, which, more or less, the way in which I'm presenting tonight, would bring us right up to date. Now I ask you, being the astute sort you are, what next? Taking my model as being not invalid, not incorrect, what would be next? I've already suggested to you that a good paradigm itself should suggest to the alert eye a next possible step. So what should be next? Oh, all right, I'll answer it. How about this? Human intelligence. The hints are already out there in the ordinary world. It's already being referred to by lots of quite ordinary folks as, that is, present day, as being the information age. And I've already touched on such as that and pointing out that now we're in the beginning, at least, of great profits. Fortunes going to be made, power exercised, not over the control any longer, almost exclusively of land and the treasures therein, but of information and the treasures therein. So I would suggest that in the model that I have constructed tonight, that the next stage will very likely be, or could be, I'll say for you, human intelligence. You could even look at it as being the upcoming, pending center of human activity, even being the human alternative of man himself, not the family, not the tribe, the second stage that I depicted tonight, that is, and I even referred to it as other humans. That's when humans began to take each other rather seriously. The beginnings of that which followed, the beginnings of bringing together states, governments, the beginning of a kind of civilization, of humans beginning to be driven to the point of saying that other human life was important, whereas before that human life wasn't very important. It certainly wasn't important as a quarter acre of good corn or as a kill of some animal. Human life was very expendable. But rather than being referring to other humans, that is, human life in the abstract, what I'm suggesting to you is now that the next stage is the human, not humanity, not the human in the abstract, but humans, and especially the alternate human. That is, the real specific dream of individuals being different, having some super intelligence, and of course is tied, I might suggest to you, with the rise of so-called computerism, the information age, that now man can expand not any longer just his physical prowess through machinery, mechanized levers, engines, but now expand this, do the same sort of thing, but instead of it being looked at as mechanical energy, last time I checked, we were past the point of treadle-operated computers and kerosene-operated ones, and it's down to the point that it is really beyond mechanical advantage to the brain. It is getting closer to the brain itself, that is, the electronic flow and stimulation of man-made, man-sorted information is now an addition. In the same way the man is stronger with a kind of robotic arm, that he is stronger in what he can do with an engine, it is now becoming the human intelligence that I'm suggesting to you would be the next most promising step. The step that suggests itself as being the center of human life. This, I might add, would finally bring up to date, if this happens, would bring up to date that which the revolutionists have been involved with for thousands and thousands of years, and that is the private, secret enjoyment of one's own intelligence. And of course, as always, when things in the city at the ordinary level reach a certain level, if in fact they reach a level that I could identify as being previously a revolutionist or an extraordinary level, when humanity reaches that, of course, then the stakes are upped, and whatever the alternate individual, the people with new intelligence are involved with, also moves up. But what I was hinting at in a relative way is ordinary people, the city in general, beginning to reach a kind of level wherein they are going to begin to enjoy that kind of secret internal pleasure of their own intelligence, rather than looking at, this is all, I'm speaking relatively, of course, right now, and I'm inferring a quite gradual process, if you know what gradual means. But whereas you have large segments of human intelligence now looking at itself, describing itself, its functions as being detrimental, all forms of intellectual illness, or emotional illness as they still want to call it sometimes, but of depression, fears, phobias, manias. In other words, they see that part of the human problem, especially the further you get into the horizontal cutting edge of civilization, that is, the further you get away from the deserted, semi-deserted island where people are just barely speaking, more into the Western world of Europe and the United States, you hear more and more of people saying that part of their problem would seem to be their own intelligence. They might use other terms, their own mind, their own personality. That, I'm suggesting to you, is going to begin to taper off. And you're going to find people more and more describing and feeling as though the center of their joy, almost the centerpiece of their personal existence, is their own intelligence. Now, I had 2 or 3 other things in mind that we'll circle back to this, because that should sound simple and straightforward enough. Now, I want to pick up from several nights ago when I was reading out questions. If you recall, someone asked me a question along these lines. I didn't bring the question, but this was the gist of it. How someone in a position of authority, for example in the business world, somebody in a managerial position, someone with underlings, how do you get them to function at what you consider to be an acceptable level without, and then the person who wrote the question used one of my old terms about kicking their machine, that is, of mistreating people who are operating in just mechanical fashion. I used to point out, don't go around kicking other people's machines. Don't be a critic. Don't expect the impossible, and etc. And I responded to it, but now I want to try and expand on it for you a little bit. There are levels of complexity, even in the city life. I say even, there can't be an exception where we're talking about city life out in the bushes, between the 2 areas. If there was some other area, none of it can be an exception, but there are levels of complexity. And when you are in the city, let's go back to that example and apparently start from there. You are in some city activity, your job, your profession. And whatever the profession, whatever the occupation is, the city has already determined that it has a purpose. And it's stated, if you're an attorney, your purpose is so-and-so. If you're a brain surgeon, the purpose of surgery is such and such. If you're a drywall man, the purpose is to get drunk. I mean, it's to manhandle sheetrock and etc. If you are in a position of some authority, that is, you have some underlings, somebody answers to you, then to serve the purpose that life has stated that this occupation, that institution, that profession is involved with, for you to be in such a position, you're going to have to understand that it is up to the complex to help direct the less complex. I was going to say the more simple, but some of you probably are still touchy about words. Part of your job is to help properly direct the less complex. And there is everywhere, I'm just using this to start this off with, there is a level of complexity that touches everything and is never noticed. And I could even draw a kind of diagram, I guess, seeing as how I'm about to. How about although I'm drawing this two-dimensionally and can even wave my hands about and make it sound like it's three-dimensionally, you understand this is only a piece of something that is even more dimensional. But you could look at it as being literally like this, and I'll break it up just enough that I perhaps can sketch a few maps, or some of you may be able to see something on your own, that you can look at life, human life, but all of life, but we're talking about human life, is arranged, let's say, from extremely simplistic, moderately simplistic, to complex, to moderately complex, to extremely complex. But since I'm drawing it this way, and since we were talking in words, and words are held down by the weight of two- and three-dimensional reality, let's do look at it as though it arises in that kind of progressive method and fashion. You are in a position of some authority, so wherever you are, but of course everything's relative, you could be the head of some department in some organization and feel like you are hot shit. And you may have 4 or 5 people under you, even more, that may in fact have to refer to you as Your Grace, Mr. Hot Shit. And so you may feel like I am very complex. But in truth, from another view, inside that organization, you might be down, at this level. You might be at the extremely simplistic level, which will give you some idea of who it is you're pushing around. But none of that at all invalidates what I'm going to try and point at and hint at that you should be able to see in all aspects of life. There is this kind of structure, and I broke it down just enough. Somebody ever noticed that breaking things up into 3? Of course, you can break them up into 2, and it seems to be just right, as I pointed out. But you can also break them up into 3, if you're a little bit better, and it seems just right. The beginning and the end. But see, I've never pushed it any further except to say there's more. But what if you broke it up into 4? We won't go into that. This is a fair verbal disassembling and then rearranging, since I'm the one doing it, of a kind of strata of progressive movement from simplistic to less and less simplistic into more and more complex, or we could just draw one big line and call it the complex and the simplistic, the simple. Life is arranged in such a way that things in human life, and otherwise, but in human affairs, are in such a way that the complex are continually exerting an influence on the simplistic, and in a way that cannot be described adequately at all in three-dimensional language. The simplistic is growing from this. Now, there are simplistic places, there are simplistic bundles of molecules, there are simplistic life forms that come and go, that vanish, that die out. Now, everyone knows that. There are organizations that die out. There are businesses that die out. Inside of organizations, there are departments that are set up that may have a very complex apparent strata put together, funding. 6 months later, the department has died just as cold as a dinosaur in Toledo. But going on eternally, without plugging in examples, going on eternally is this situation of the complex, the more complex, directing, pushing, influencing the less complex, and the less complex growing and themselves becoming more complex from the pushing, the directing, and it's not a kicking around. But from one view, what I want you to hear was, I could have used this some years ago, and if I was still talking about dealing with people on a personal level, and I say don't kick people's machine around. Even then, I didn't use the terms, but what I was pointing out was this, and now you should be able to translate it. For you to even be able to fathom the idea that you shouldn't kick somebody's machine around. Somebody who cannot help at all what they're doing, you got no business trying to punish them. You got no business beating on a Coke machine that stole your quarter and trying to reason with it. For you to believe that you understood something from that, and I won't question it, but for you to believe that you did, you have got to see that at least in that instance between you and the other person, now I'm saying don't kick that person's or anybody's machine around, then you would have had to be more complex to even hear the idea. Now surely you can understand that. You would have to have been. It would not have made any sense. You would still be holding other people absolutely personally responsible for everything they did. So you'd have to have some idea. You'd have to have some out of the ordinary intellectual suspicion, a few glimpses that every now and then I see without any kind of rancor, no kind of pessimism, I get glimpses that this whole thing almost is a preordained piece of inalterable machinery, me and everybody else. So what am I doing? Kicking at somebody else and saying straighten up when I can't straighten up, or when we telling somebody don't act like that when I act like that and can't help it most of the time. But you've got to have at least that much alternative intelligence to even take to heart, as they used to say, the idea of don't kick someone else's machine. But now, to expand that into a wider response, to take it into a more complex area, I want you to try and see that everything is arranged. It's not conspiracy, unless some of you still want to look at life as being a conspiracy. And I'll leave that to you. You can wrestle with life. Send it a note. Tell it that the jig is up and you got the good, you know what's going on if you want to. But it is not a human conspiracy of some kind. And the simplistic of the world are not being held down. The simplistic of the world are being fed. The simplistic of the world are being sucked up in this kind of arrangement. But they are always under a kind of, not control, a kind of direct influence, a feeding, a repositioning, a pushing, all for the benefit of the total organism, not harmful to the more simplistic. But when you're in a position, and I assume you'll catch on that you can hear what I'm even saying for the last couple of minutes, you can hear it literally and metaphorically, and both of them are correct. But even at the city, back to a real hardwired physical, material level, under city conditions, things are arranged in such a way, not that the humans did it, and not that one human is in some way intrinsically better than another human, that the college president is better off than the janitor sweeping out the rooms. That's beyond moot. It's just irrelevant. That's not the question, that one human as such is better than another. But life is arranged in such a way that there is this kind of strata. Now I'll repeat one more time whether I'm going into it or not, but you ought to keep this on a parallel track. This is not just true. This is not some unique situation in human affairs. This is true in the animal kingdom. It is true in the complete feeding cycle of the planet Earth. It is true in the whole universe. But in human affairs, the more complex are continually having a kind of influence that is not reversed. So when you are in a position, and there you are, however you got there, and you are part of some operation in the city, and the operation has a known, stated purpose, that as bricklayers, our job is to what, men? Lay them bricks, sir. That's right. And lay them straight. Am I correct? Yes, sir. All right, that's the purpose of being a bricklayer. And you happen to be named Buford, and therefore, of course, you rose in the ranks, and now you are the straw boss. It is up to you. You are now part of a more complex strata than those working under you. This gets into one of those real tricky areas, but I say that. Surely some of you can see such as this one now. Buford, let's just cut off reality again and let me play movie director. That is, we just got to jump in the middle of reality like everything else that went before and sideways and up and down never happened. where I'll play Moses or whoever is now getting credit for writing Genesis. In the beginning, all right, here we are. Suddenly, we look in this field out here at this apartment complex, and there's Buford. And here's 4 or 5 bricklayers and the mud boys. Buford's in charge. He is more complex, but that does not make some permanent, objective statement about Buford. Right now, let us say it's a Monday morning. Buford's there. There may be a few bricklayers he's worked with before. There may be a brand new one he hired over the weekend. There they are. Now look, they stand there, shuffle around, smoke a while, and Buford said, well, you know, he tells the mud boys, he treats them even more simplistically, hey guys, get the stuff ready, we're going to crank up here in a minute. So they get to work. The bricklayers keep standing around a little while. He is obviously running things. But this is not some permanent objective situation. Before the week's out, or over the next weekend, Buford could get drunk and put in jail. And the contractors, the guys building the complex, has to find another Buford. They may have to take one of these guys. Buford may hang around in jail. He may have to go home and borrow money. He may show back up next week and have to, the week after that, and ask for a job laying brick. But at any given time, in any situation, you have just got to see this. It's just right in front of your face. And it's got nothing to do with morals. It's got nothing, in our sense of the word, to do with actual intelligence. It has to do with the fact that the human brain is more complex than the liver. In certain regards. In certain regards, it's not. But in every situation, there is something that is more complex, relatively speaking, to another part. If not, everything would be a grand, all-encompassing beige. The whole world would be a what? A moon pie. The whole world would be a perfect sphere. The whole world would be numbness. In other words, there would be no differentiation between anything. There would be no contrast. There would be no this or that. There would be no life. There would be no existence of which you could be conscious. In every situation, there is this kind of strata. And if you think that I'm making it too fancy, there is, in every situation, wherever it is, bricklayers, a university somewhere, there is this, there's the complex, and it's divided from the simplistic. In any situation, and it can shift. Not just Buford and the bricklayers over a week's time, it can shift in an hour. Somebody can be fired. Whole departments in a business, in a university, can be arranged, and after an hour's meeting, that situation between the complex and the simple can be reversed. It can be shifted in such a way that you're in another department, maybe with the same title, but now there's a different title. Whereas you were head of department over here, you go into another department that has head of department and then chairman of department. And so now you're still head of the department, but now you go somewhere else, and there's somebody more complex than you. Now I repeat, even though I'm saying things like somebody, it's not the person. You don't understand? It's not the person. You got to be able to think, in a sense, really royally, governmentally, that it's not the man, it's the office. It's not the individual, it's the crown. It's the state. So it's not the person. It's not that Buford is more complex, but it's every situation in life, and in particular in the cities where I'm taking as a springboard again. In every situation there has to be that kind of strata, or nothing would happen. It is the, if you want to look at it this way, it's a variation. Those of you that hadn't figured it out, I don't mean I just renamed it, because there's a difference. But it is a variation of the dominant and submissive. It's not the same thing, but it's a reflection of the same thing, which is, all right, I'll tell you, the exercise of power. Without power, there is no life. And there, of course, there is no power unless there's somebody exercising some kind of power and somebody being the recipient of it. You cannot have simplicity without something more complex, but you can't have something more complex without something more simplistic. You can't have growth unless there's something that, relatively speaking, is not growing. You cannot have something, if we were still operating at that crude tribal level, you cannot have something that's good unless there's something that's less good. You cannot have something that's true unless there's something that's less true, something that's questionable. All of you should understand, at the very least, or try and understand this, to take it back to your everyday affairs, that this is an unavoidable situation. It has nothing whatsoever to do with morality. It has nothing to do with Marxist philosophy, capitalistic philosophy. It has nothing to do with holding people down, because Buford can go down the tubes overnight and somebody else be straw balls. A man who is king can be hung by his private parts out in the public place and then tarred and feathered, and that's the end of him. A man can be voted out of office overnight. My, how the mighty have fallen. That's part of being the mighty, because you're always on the verge of falling. The situation is not stagnant. It is not one group, it is not the more simplistic being held down, because the more simplistic are eating off of the complex. The complex, in a sense, are giving them the seeds of the complex levels on destruction. Now, destruction is relative, because what we're talking about, what I'm talking about, now back to a three-dimensional matrix, which is very limited, but everybody knows what a slinky is, don't you? That whole thing of wound up wire that you can put on the top stair and get it started, and it'll flop over and over and over. All right, this situation is like a slinky going up the wall, going upstairs, because there's a kind of flip-flop, not as simple as just one instance and that one instance of Buford and the bricklayers, but there is continually going on, staggered, off-centered, of a flip-flop going to where the simplistic one situation eats off the complex. The complex is having to feed the more simplistic, and then they get fatter, they get more complex than the complex is right now, and they flop over. And then they're in charge. And it's not that one single line keeps doing that over and over, although I can think of some that happens for a reasonable length of time that you could observe in history. Of course, many of you could observe it yourself, but you'd find it kind of yucky. Right now, you'd probably find it, ew. The simplistic is not a moral judgment. It is not a quality judgment. It is a matter of the relative positions in the exercise of power, which is absolutely unavoidable, has no negative connotation, but is absolutely unavoidable for growth. There's no such thing as growth. There's not even the opportunity for any sort of change unless somebody's got some power, unless one entity somewhere relative to some other parts of the entity has any power. You've got to see that. Any question of change, again, is beyond moot. It's silly. You would even have no desire to change, because all of your desire to change is to be more complex. No matter if you call it a better person, a better human, a better mother, a better lover, a better businessman, what you're talking about is, I want to be more complex than I am. That's all it is. It is the biological extension of life itself, all the way from a single sperm into the egg. It is the nature of everyone maturing. It is the nature of the human race becoming more complex, becoming healthier, becoming more intelligent, becoming more under apparent inner direction. It is all a matter. What is called evolution, if it is called biological evolution, you could call it spiritual evolution, you could call it intellectual evolution, but it's all a matter of this. Of that, whatever we're talking about, of that becoming more and more and more and more complex. And it doesn't matter what it is. If we're talking about at the cellular level, if we're talking about at the absolute biological level with no hint of intelligence, all the way to intelligence. The desire for education, although it doesn't work in that way, it's simply the desire. People think of it intellectually as separate from biological or physical, but it is the desire to be more complex. Why else does someone want a PhD? Don't just say because I can make more money, because the only reason people want more money, nobody can see this, is they think it will make them more complex. They think they'll be better off. Not just that they'll be better off that I'll have a fancier car and I can put a moat around my house and nobody can steal my money. They may say that, but remember, you've been in the city, you've been lived there long enough, always remember this. I've taught you this, sing along, is people will say anything. Always remember that. The desire to be famous, the desire to be rich is all, if you can analyze it correctly, is all on the assumption that if I were famous, that's hard to define if you try to pin down famous people. And it's been tried, people writing biographies or people writing a book or a treatise on fame. The nature of an unanswered question, or some such title. And they try to figure out what fame is, and they talk to famous people. And they get famous people to say what it's like to be famous. And nobody can come to any conclusion. I can. I can tell you what. Fame is the assumption. The dream of fame is the assumption. Not just, now this may be your picture, that you'd have all the sex in the world you'd want, that people would fawn over you, that you'd get the best seats in the house, that you probably wouldn't have to pay for much in life, that people, as soon as they recognize that you would say, oh, no, your money is no good. But what is all that? It is the assumption that if I was famous, I could not be the simple bastard I am now. And you look to outside heroes. People look to other famous people because the only way you know about fame is to you there is somebody else famous, at least one other person. And so you have some famous hero if you want to be famous. That God, I know my guitar playing is not bad. My lips may be a little small. But look at Mick Jagger. God, if just a part of that kind of fame and acclaim. But what are you actually saying? What you're saying is that Mick Jagger cannot be the simple-minded prick that I am. I mean, you can't be world famous and fly around and hang out with princesses and kings and presidents. You can't do that and be the simple fucker I am. So, ergo, if I was famous like that, I would just, some way, automatically be a more complex person. There is hero worship. There is the unexamined assumption that people dream of fame. Same thing with riches. Same thing with ordinary people for power. The people wanting power, crude people, oftentimes cleverly wired up in the city sense, but people seeking power, political power. And outside observers, in the same way that some outside observers have some fringe aspects of life's own body, taking a look at some of the things it's doing, the kind of critics, not only of fame, the people that laugh at the rest of humanity and try to get a job as a paid critic to point out the folly of letting famous people influence you. Then there are also critics that point out, all right, those that want power are dangerous. Whether it's in a democracy, whether it's in a totalitarian government, that's dangerous. Because what they want to do is get all people that want power are deranged, and what they want to do is get up there so they can torture people and take away all your property. That may happen, but that's not the basis of it. Those who are fairly simplistic in a relative sense that want power as opposed to fame and wealth, which are three splendid, easy classifications of what drives people in the city, their kind of dreams. The desire for power is not simply, although they may do it, is not simply that people I don't like the looks thereof, I can point to one of my minions and say, kill that fucker. Bring me that woman. They may do that, but that's not it. The thing is, these little privates and corporals out fighting in bushes are dukes and barons engaged in court intrigue, wanting to overthrow the powers, the current dictator, the current president, the current king. It's on the basis of that their dream of the current dictator, their assumption of the king, as fat, as crude, as boorish, as ill-tempered as he may be, their assumption is the guy's not as simple as I am, but he couldn't be king. To be king in some way would make me a more complex person. To throw out this dumb tyrant and make me the dumb tyrant, I would be more complex. Nobody analyzes, they do not think it that way, but that's exactly what it is, and you should be able to hear it. All dreams of going somewhere in the city are on that basis. If I looked better, if I was more charming, all that's just a matter of fame. You may call it recognition. But just about any dream you can think of, will fall into a desire. An assumption, but a desire for either wealth, fame, or power. And they're all the same thing. That those in the position that I now envy cannot be the simple-minded peckerhead I am. I mean, it's not even worth, nobody ever thought that. In those words, never. Because in the city, it's ridiculous. Because in the city, there's no alternative. If I told this to people in the city, and they went, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And if I said, do you realize that nobody with ordinary intelligence has ever thought that on this planet? That what they're dreaming of, and their heroes, their dream is that my hero, in whatever field it is, my hero cannot be as simple as I am, or he could not be where he is, he or she. Therefore, that's what I'm envying, because if I was there in some way, I would cease to be the simpleton that I am. Now, you all heard that. A person in the city, if I held them down and put hot irons to their hidden parts, they might go, all right, the sense made sense. But they would still, in the privacy of their little heart, would say, it's silly though, it's not true. The sense makes sense, I heard what you said, but it's not true. But it is true. That's exactly what heroes are. That's exactly what all dreams of accomplishment in the city amount to. And note, it's not wrong. I've been making jokes, made you laugh. I'm not criticizing. I'd be criticizing life. It is exactly what I've been talking about for the last 15 or 20 minutes, is this. That it's not foolish for people to have heroes in the city. Contraire, it is not dumb for people who want to be famous. People who want to fight and claw for power and for wealth. It's not dumb. It's necessary. It's life alive. We got to turn the audio over. In the city, I wanted to at least wrap this, that any of you who have questions about how much influence or how much should you be trying to affect those that are under you in some position, you should look at, assuming you're not trying to get yourself fired, whatever you are, there you are, and your institution, your business, your organization, your profession has a stated purpose to get bricks laid. All right? And you're in some kind of position. There are people under you. The position, you can look at it that way, which is, of course, a better way until you learn how to take things properly personally. But you can look at it as my position is more complex than theirs. My responsibility is more complex. And, of course, also the assumption is there that you know more, or that you're more dependable, that you've had more experience than those under you. So you are more complex. The position in which you are is more complex than they are. You are then not only within your rights, but unless you're just trying to fuck up, to serve the city. That is life. To serve the city and to help promote the stated purpose. It's not up to you right then to decide, well, the purpose is never going to happen. This whole organization will fall apart. It may. But unless you know it's about to tomorrow, in which you should be looking for a new job anyway. But it's not up to you to decide, well, we got too many dumb people here. We got too many underlings. This business will never go. This university will never last. This hospital will fall apart. This construction company will never fly. If you're there and you've been hired and you've got to make a paycheck, that's not all of it, but you've got to pay right now to stand here on this planet and have somebody help feed you. But life itself is growing, and it grows through hospitals, libraries, colleges, believe it or not, construction companies. It grows, and there you are a part of it, and you know what the stated purpose of it is. Then it is your duty to help promote the purpose of the organization, the business. And almost everybody is in some position relative to somebody else that they are in a more complex position. So then it's not a matter that you're mistreating people under you, it's a matter of you helping support. Of course, in this case, you're trying to do it a little bit willfully to even hear this. You're trying to help push, to help move along, at least not to hinder, but at least to help move along the stated purpose. You didn't state it. You got there and they said the purpose of this business is to lay brick. The purpose of this hospital is to help people. The purpose of this business is to sell widgets. You do, from your position, what will help promote the stated purpose of the undertaking. That is not kicking people around. To do less is what brings up the kind of questions of a practical nature that I understood. Of thinking, well, am I wasting my time, or am I in some way being intellectually, if not spiritually, dishonest to kick around underlings? You're not kicking around underlings if you're trying to help promote the growth of life. And the growth of life happens through construction companies, libraries, telephone sales, believe it or not. Whatever the undertaking is, if you have underlings, whether you look at it this way or not, if you have somebody under you then you are in the position of being in a more complex, at a more complex level than they are. And you have a responsibility, not to them, but to life. Of course, it looks like you got a responsibility to your business, to your employer. That, if you can remember that, if you can begin to see that that is the situation everywhere. Churches, colleges, as I said, life outside of man. This is the nature of the structure that passes along energy. This is one model of it in all of creation that you can see three-dimensionally. So in a sense, you have a responsibility. You're not doing anyone any harm. You're not pushing people around. If you start doing such things as pushing people around and throwing your weight around, as they call it in the city, then that's what you're doing. But I'm answering you people and responding to this on the basis that you're trying not to do something outside of that which is necessary to move along the supposed purposes of your occupation, your undertaking. You do that, and that's it. There's nothing else to say. Somebody else is doing it to you. If they're doing their job, you're always being fed. You're always being privy to a more complex influence in every area of your life. Humanity, at the molecular level, knows that, which is another reason I could suggest to you that this long-held idea of a God. Because everyone, and I don't mean this now at human level, an intellectual level, I'm talking about every one of your molecules, every cell, every particle in life understands that something is more complex than it is. And I'm not inferring that in any way that you would ever understand or that I could try and prove that particles and atoms and molecules and cells talk or think, but I'm telling you this, they are aware that something is more complex than they are. And it reaches the human level, and humans look around, and what can they visually find or intellectually find more complex in themselves? Nothing. Nothing. Because there is nothing that ordinary consciousness can find that is more complex than itself. And so then it has to, as you call it in the city, imagine something. And what it imagines is new intelligence. Read God. And that's the way it always comes out. It's the best shot they can give it. It's not silly. It's not dumb. What else could they do? What else could you have done before you met me? Laugh. What else can you do? You imagine superhumans. You imagine superintelligence. You imagine this strata carried further. Because at any given time, even at the city, to use the 6 levels I drew, they're extremely complex. That is the most intelligent people at the city level. That is the most complex organisms. Molecules put together, passing off as men and women, that life is produced, named them men and women. Those are the extremely complex at the city level. What can they look for? They're left with the same thing. All they can do is imagine what it would be if I had, what will I call it? And they might say, what if I had a new intelligence? And of course I'd say, well, I copyrighted that. No. They dream. I'm suggesting to you, and it's going to become more and more so, not of God's, but of the human intelligence as being the next stage. It's more and more the center of life. Not just living in your little privacy of your own little skull, but that human intelligence itself. That the idea, this is of course not true worldwide, and I know this as well as anybody, because nothing happens all at once. And there's always the more simplistic. But what you're going to find is, look at our situation, where we are. It's less and less a matter of concern of feeding yourself, of staying healthy. You can get food without working. You can get medical care without working. You can get somebody to put you in the hospital and pay for it without you doing it. You can do almost everything. You can get free psychiatric care. What am I leaving out? You can get free transportation to the hospital, to the doctor. You can get almost anything except what? Somebody to think for you. That you can't get. It's just not possible. So it's reaching the point, and you people at the city level are, as I keep pointing out, we are right at the edge of the city development on this planet. But it is reaching the point that everything below the intelligence, the level of intelligence, the operation of human intelligence, below that, the feeding thereof, in a sense, is a fait accompli. If you got intelligence even at the moderately simplistic level, you can get everything done for you from the intellectual level down for free. That's just not the problem. A few phone calls, you got to ride a bus a few times across town, fill out some damn forms. But from here down, you really have nothing to worry about. From here down, you could say that you have reached, right up to date, of human progress as per the model I started out this evening's commentaries with. And then I was suggesting, after I asked you the question, what next, is at an individual level, are people beginning to perceive human intelligence itself, their own intelligence itself, being the stuff even after that, you might say, as being the centerpiece, the focal point of being alive. That you are not having to break your buns every day to feed yourself, to house yourself, to get medical care. And so you end up with lots of FT. Free time. And life does not sit around with free time. Something else is going on. Just people cannot recognize as the changes are taking place, and I'm suggesting you the changes taking place is the human intelligence itself being the next stage of being the center part of life, the focal point of people individually, humanity in general. Not all at once. It'll never be all at once. If everything was all at once, remember, you would not have this situation, and everything would be a real shiny, perfectly symmetrical kumquat, or something equally as boring, a turnip. And that'd be, we'd all be turnips. Life would be a turnip. That's as bland and boring as watercress, isn't it? Yeah, turnip. That's what it would be. Let me see if I can hit a couple other areas that some of you might find interesting. You would think, from things I've said, and even off on your own, it's not, I didn't make up the apparent external history that's been going on in such areas as I'm about to mention again, but you might think that the most efficient, if not most oppressive exercise of power would be an absolute monarch, unrestrained monarch. Would it not? I mean, just think about it a second. Everybody knows what a monarch, that sounds better than a tyrant. Plus they don't seem wont in the city to list tyrannies as one of the equal footing forms of government with oligarchies and aristocracies. But at any rate, you would think a monarch, mono, one guy, one woman, absolute monarch, that is no restraints, not a constitutional monarch. An absolute monarch would have to be the most efficient, if not a most oppressive, the most direct exercise of power over the people, right? Sure would seem so. But throughout history, they have found, I say they found, I'm sure some people's noted here and there. I know they have. I'm not being funny. It's been noted along these lines. I'm just fixing to sort of straighten it out and drive a stake toward you about this. But it's been pointed out that although that's the way it would seem to be, that whenever you have had a monarchy, let me say with that example for a minute, whenever you've had a monarchy that through whatever historical whims, that the monarchy took on some shared power, or engaged in some shared power, like took on, let the people establish, or some group, the peers, something right under the royalty, let them establish a legislature. That is, shared power, that he's no longer an absolute monarch, he would now be like a parliamentary monarch. Some rules and regulations, you all understand that, I'm not being funny yet. This is just the way things operate in the life. This has gone on continually. Normally, historically, they look back and they say, well, he was losing power. He thought he was going to... At any rate, a monarch, oftentimes apparently throughout history, for whatever reason, seems to have relinquished his absolute authority and taken on some assistance. Normally it comes about as legislative assistance. People that some of the upper classes begin to suggest things and he takes them into consideration. It's simply this: he releases absolute power and shares power. All right? Apparently we'd be going downhill in a certain way. But a strange thing, a surprising thing occurs, and it's this. In certain ways, from certain quite real views, it happens, and I can point it out, and now of course we're going somewhere else with this. That after that situation of apparently shared power is put in motion, the government, the king, can then get the people to do things that he could have never done alone. The two great examples that come to mind throughout history was he can make people go to war without paying them, which those of you that don't remember your history, conscriptions, the people fighting for the king, is fairly recent in recorded history. Fairly recent. It was a matter that the king had to pay people. His people, people from across the border, people from 2 or 3 countries away. That was just the accepted thing. They never expected farmers, just the people, to go fight for the king. The king had a problem with some other king, you paid people. But most farmers couldn't leave their land. But once they began to share power, once the prime days of absolute monarchs began to decline, and they began to share power, began to, in different countries, set up houses of lords. They began to share power. The people began to submit in a certain way and make sacrifices that they would not previously have made, or they didn't make. The second great example that comes to mind is taxation. I'm talking about the kind of taxation that the people, more or less voluntarily, that is, after they say, all right, the legislature and the kings agreed that everybody should pay X amount of their turnips and your money, if you had any for the year, to the government to help us provide for the armies, mainly. Now that we've got armies and we're drafting you people. But up until that time, up until that kind of taxation, you couldn't call it taxation in the sense I mean it. They used to confiscate the wealth when they needed it. If they could, if they get by with their king, he's off on new private war, and he would try. He'd go to the most simplistic areas of his country, but there was a point past which that it was self-defeating. To take away all the farmers, give me everything you got, we got to feed the army. He can do that one time, and he's done for. And I'm not attributing to kings, of course, any kind of intelligence, but life knows what it's doing when it drives people, and it writes and produces these scenarios called history and the human drama. So a king, in the absolute exercise of a monarchy, never did. They just didn't have any success. Or if any did, you never heard about them because they were just about done for. They could not go out and tax the people. That is, on the basis of, hey folks, I'm your king. They go, yeah. And look, we got trouble. We got some people threatening to attack us, or I'm about to attack them. And now I've hired these soldiers from down, and those old guys were left over from the Ottoman Empire or the Roman Empire. I got them hired. They're pretty good guys, but we need some more equipment. We need some horses. We got to have some food. And they say, so? And they say, would you people like to contribute? That never did happen. Not in monarchies. Now, there were times that some monarchy, I'm sure, but you just don't hear about them. They hardly make the history books. Did go, well, the hell with all this. If you people are not going to play, I'll just take everything you got. And let's assume he had the power to do it. At least you got these Romans, and he promised, I'll pay you this weekend. And so they come and he says, go out and get everybody, take everything they got, all their animals and everything you've got that we can sell or trade in for some more arms. All right, he can go do it, let's say. Once. Now, for one thing, if he's going to take all their crops, even if they did stick around, to have it done to him again, the king's he's going to use up everything they got, all the crops he took, and he's got to wait a year. And he's trying to fight a war. But the way things are arranged, let me just push it a little further, I'm suggesting to you, since it did not happen, I'm telling you it could not have happened, that kings did that. Life was too intelligent. So when you had one person, apparently the operation of an absolute monarchy, unconditional power, there were restraints, believe it or not. And I just picked out two. I could think up some more. The control of people's minds, which the era I'm talking about back then, the control of people's minds seems to be a pretty low-level importance. No offense to our ancestors, but you know, take a look at some of those paintings of people back in the 12 and 1300s. Even the kings, the intellects of the day, all look like. Of course, maybe it's that paintings don't age well. Maybe they didn't look that bad. Just that some distorted version of the Dorian Gray that just the paintings are so old now they begin to look dumb. I don't know. But at any rate, I assume you could hear what I was doing. That really, two prime areas that have got to support a government, that is a seat of power, the dominant dancing partner between somebody and the people. There were things that the absolute monarch apparently could not get. What I was doing, that really, two prime areas that have got to support a government, that is a seat of power, the dominant dancing partner between somebody and the people. There were things that the absolute monarch apparently could not get the people to suffer, such as come to fight for me. Up until the monarchies began to share power, there was no such thing as a people's army. I'll tell you, that is not the scope of history to cover that. Whenever that tried to happen, it just slid through the cracks. You could not find it. It was all a mercenary affair. People did not fight for the king. They did not fight for their country. Of course, there were very few people that thought they lived in the country back during the time I'm talking about. But I wanted to point that out. But the king could not say, all right, I'm the king of you people, more or less. And they'll go, well, more or less. And he says, look, help me. There's some people going to come up here and attack us. And I'm the king, I'm the center of power, I represent you people, come in and help. And they think, well, I got a family to feed, I got to plant my thing. I didn't start a fight with those people. Of course, I'm just making up all this, but this is the way that if you went back and tried to look at it down at ground level, at a more simplistic level, kings simply could not do it. Back in biblical times, up Grecian times, they were all paid armies. And most of the time it wasn't local people. The people did not fight for the king, for the ruler. They did not voluntarily, even if there was a law passed, they did not engage in supporting financially the king. None of this happened until absolute power, monarchs, began to share power. Then people, apparently the power is now diluted, but now people would suffer more, sacrifice more than they ever would when they apparently were under the rule of one guy that had uncontrolled power. They could have said, hey, come fight. And everybody said, I'm not. And he said, all right, you go fight, I'm going to kill you. But once he shared power, let's say he couldn't do that. He would now have to go through some kind of legislative process to try and put through some kind of sanctions to execute against people if they didn't. Or when he was in full power, if he said, all right, I want you people to give me 10% of what you got, we'll call it taxes, and I want you to give it to me to help me run the government. And they all go, go get a job, go somewhere else. And he can say, all right, I'll come take it. And they assume he could. And they can say, all right, come take it, we'll go somewhere else. That was the way the whole thing was balanced. But once life began to move and it got more complex in a certain way, I'm getting to the point here, man, internally. I just want to make sure that so I can pull it on you, that the very thing that ordinary intelligence could never analyze in this way, that when there apparently was one guy, one figure with unconditional power, there were things that he could not make the people do that they would do once he began to share power. Now, are you ready? May I suggest to you, now look internally and consider this. Thusly, what you end up having, as I'm going to point to and sketch for you, when you have splintered, conditional, inner rule in yourself, in an individual, it makes your own people's passive suffering and sacrifices operate just that much more efficiently. God damn it, somebody better have heard me after all that build-up. All right, let's look at another way, the way I've been talking for the last few nights, off and on, about if you had a kind of unconditional ruler in you, then of all the things you do, like, hey, I'm going to do so-and-so, and the people would not say, wait a minute, you can't do that, or go join a club, or we better take it easy. All right, but now look at it another way. Conversely, were it not for the fact that humans do not have an absolute monarch, due to that fact that they do have a splintered kind of government, that kind of ambiguity, that once you have a conditional monarchy, you can't really go to the king anymore and say, King, will you do so-and-so for me? I entreat you, do this one thing. He might say, look, kid, I'd like to. And your father is a friend of mine, but now that I've taken on this legislature, I've let them set up this House of Lords, or whatever the hell they call it. I got to check with them, because now they're helping finance all of this. Now, I've let them take part of the power. Do you hear me? The conversely, now in the city, humans course, what I mean by and large is the people in you will put up with all kinds of, well, I'll be historically more correct, shit, sacrifices, suffering, because there is no absolute monarch to whom to appeal. That once you get the shared power, once you get conditional power, that once you turn into you and go, somebody help me. And it's like one of your partners says, kid, I'd like to. You know, in fact, I feel like I'm more you than the other guy is in here. But it's not just me. Of course, you don't say this, but this is exactly what it fucking amounts to when you say, well, I'm going to do so-and-so. I'm going to quit smoking. And there's no king to say, so be it. All the people, nobody smokes anymore. He can't do that. His prime minister smokes. And his prime minister, as it were, is married to the king's sister. He owns, the king is having to give his prime minister and him and his family over the last 20 years 10% of the land the king used to own for this prime minister to keep bringing in some of his guys to help fight some of these phony baloney wars the king's been doing to make himself look good and to get more famous. I'm suggesting to you that there are things in you that you consider to be personal problems, weaknesses, sufferings, fears, phobias, things that I just don't know what to do. I hate it. I won't help. What you're looking at is the normal situation. You're being taxed. You're being drafted into wars. And you're submitting to it because of shared power, the ambiguity of power, that there is no absolute monarch. Because if there was, there are things that he couldn't get by with. But as long as there's not unconditional power, as long as there's not an absolute monarchy anymore, if there ever was, but as long as there's not an absolute monarchy, the people, that is you, by and large, what seems to be your life, will suffer sacrifices, impositions, pains in the ass, and you'll do it. That the more, all right, let's jump back out in life now. The more, apparently, that power is distributed and diluted, such as what's called as a democracy, the more you do that. Think about it. You all know this. I'm not fixing to surprise you here. This is just a recognized fact. Nobody put it together this way. The more, apparently, that the power is diluted, the greater is the participation of the people, for instance, in those two areas I pointed out, of taxation and conscription. That is, let's say America is known as the freest country in the world. Assume that. Who, in the history of this nation, for the last 200 years on this planet, what country will turn out the greatest if they just suddenly, the president says, folks, we're going to war? God damn, you'd get run over for people going up until, well, forget the Vietnam thing, but you would get people, you'd be run over for people running to sign up for the draft. I mean, to enlist, not the draft. That is my duty. It is. And as many people as say, and I assume everybody dreams of cheating, you know, fudging on your income tax, according to the best reports that they can come up with, America, by and large, way above any other country that tries to come up with some guesstimate, Americans pay more of the taxation, a greater percentage that they should than anybody. Now, I know everybody fears perhaps an audit that knows what it is, or fear that you might get put in jail if you try to defraud the government on your taxes. But by and large, if you've got any sense at all, if you don't, talk to a CPA or somebody, an attorney that knows anything, the IRS, the chance of them ever coming down on you is almost nil. And so you could be cheating the government, not just fudging a little bit. You could just about drop through the cracks and they'd never get around. Even if they had you pegged to somebody, go get him sometime, they look down about how much you owe, and Jesus, you're so far down the list, they'll never get there. And yet, what I'm trying to get at is life is arranged in such a way, the more you live under a government that apparently the power is very diluted, there is no absolute power anywhere, the more people seem to, without coercion, will volunteer to do things that an absolute monarch would have to kill you to get you to do. To voluntarily send in your money. Once a year to send in 30% of what you made. And if the government says, hey, we're going to war. You say, well, Jesus, I don't want to, but hell, you know, it's my duty. I got to. And if you were under an absolute monarchy, and there are places in the country in the world right now, I sure don't have to give you a history or a current event lesson anymore. In the areas right now where you have apparently a one-man rule, whether you want to call it an absolute monarchy or not, they got their hands full trying to get the people to fight. They can't stir up an army. They have to scare the hell out of people. They have to keep promising to where almost half the country has now been promising that, hey, come help me and we'll give you your own Azuzu and some, some shades, and you can come up here and be part of the palace guard. All right, back to internally. A few of you did gasp and your eyes flashed, but look at what you'll put up with, just in the crudest description of that you just accept it as your due in life, to be taxed, and I'm not talking about now literally, to be taxed, put upon, called to fight in wars, kicked around, abused, beaten up by the secret police. I ain't talking literally now, remember. And you'll do all that. I'm trying to show you a parallel internally, because you do not have an absolute monarchy. That the power is diffused and diluted, and the people will put up with more sacrifices under that basis than they would in circumstances that you would have thought when I started this would have been just the opposite. That the people will put up with more if there is an absolute, unconditional exercise of power from one source. And it turns out, I'm suggesting to you, that it's almost the opposite. And people sit around and stroke their chin and scratch their head and scratch their ass and call their mother and call their psychic and call their doctor and their psychiatrist and pray and chant. They're suffering from a dilution of power. They're calling out for a return to the monarchy. That's not what they call it. That's what everybody's calling for. Every time somebody gets scared to death and falls down and says, "Oh Allah, oh God," they're hauling out, "Bring back the monarchy." If I had any part of the downfall of the monarchy, forgive me. How much time we got? All right, I got one more. Let me drag into this. Let's jump from that wonderful world to the wonderful world of business. And let's start off in the city again. A good piece of sound city business advice to employees, and everybody's an employee of some kind. It would be this. If you found that you had a complaint about some aspect of your job, a sound piece of advice would be, do not make your boss, that is, whoever's more complex than you are, but do not make your boss, do not present him with this picture that you are just totally pissed at the company and your full state of employment in general. That is, if you've got a specific complaint about something, and you just go into your boss and you present the picture to him, you go in to dance with him, and you're whispering in his ears as you dance that you are just totally fed up with the company. Do you understand? Now back at city levels where we're starting as oft times we do, that is a very unsound approach, because the way life is arranged, if you do that back in the city to ordinary people, the boss has almost no recourse except to fire you. Surely you hear that. That's just the way life is. That if you go to a boss, somebody in the position, you're up, somebody above you, and instead of presenting them with some specific complaint that you have, you present them with the attitude that a lot of people do. Not just in this kind of situation, but constantly. People, going to return something to Kmart or Bloomingdale's. And you're so mad because this thing you bought and it blew up in your face or it didn't work. And you had your heart set on, you wanted to play with the thing and have it work, and it didn't work. And so you go in, and what do? You spend 5 minutes denouncing Bloomingdale's. And maybe you move on to New York City, if that's where you are, maybe on to the capitalistic system. And what you're complaining about is this little flashlight I bought that doesn't work. But you're in there cursing Bloomingdale's, tearing up their charge card in front of their face. What can they do? All right, that's just one example. I was using one I thought was easier to see, or it's just as easy. If you just go to your boss and you say, "Look, I got to talk to you about something," and you're all wired up, you're mad again, whatever it is, somebody's been bugging you, there's something about your job that's driving you nuts, and so just finally you've had it, and you go in and you storm in his office, and you say, "I've worked for this company for 20 years, and goddamn, I'm going nuts. I can't stand it any longer." 5 years. I am sick of it. And you just go on, and you just hate everything about the company, and you rip up, you start verbally attacking the restroom facilities, the lunch counter, the parking spaces, and you do it all. And finally you kind of wind down, and the boss looks at you, and let's say up until then he had no real complaint with you, and he says, God, I had no idea you felt that way. And you say, well, I do. What can he do? If you convinced him you feel that way. Now, if he is in the right position of being in a little more complex level, at a more complex level than you, he has almost no recourse. He can't really help you on that basis. That is, that all you express is abject hatred, or at least displeasure with the company. And what you're saying tacitly is with your position. Just your position. No specific complaint. Just, I'm sick. I've had it. What can he do? In no way can he help you. He has almost no recourse except to fire you. Think about it a second. You should see that. Even if you say, well, I've calmed down, I don't really feel that bad. And you say, let me think it over. I didn't mean to say all that. But you went through the kind of thing I just said, and you left. If you were the boss, what would you do? You'd realize, well, God, he's done pretty good, and he seemed to have calmed down a little bit. But anybody would go through that sort of thing and just express unconditional displeasure, if not hatred, for the whole company. And this phony baloney job of mine, the whole thing, even if they say later, well, I feel, I've calmed down, I'll be all right. You're probably done for. Or the man doesn't need his position. He doesn't deserve to be there because his thing is that you're no longer a part of the organization. I'll repeat again, almost no recourse except to let you go, to fire you. Would anyone care to find a parallel between that and the situation of you and life? And that people continually, they don't look at it this way, of course, but are continually confronting life, oftentimes in the guise of another human, taking them as being the representative of life. But what you do is express, goddamn life. Fuck this whole job. Life sucks. Not a specific complaint, but just, fuck all this. I'm sick of it. Think what I pointed out. If we were back in the city, life can't help you. Or back in the city, the boss can't help you. You don't give a specific complaint. You just storm in, and periodically you just storm in his office and you say, to hell with this company. I'm sick of it. I wish I'd never heard of this company. And then you storm out. What can he do? He keeps saying, well, what's the problem? What is it? What could I do to change this? You don't express some specific complaint. You just say, fuck the company. Screw this job. Think about what you're doing. And you, of course, I'm not inferring by any means that you do or have to do this verbally or in that kind of theatrical fashion to some other human, but what you think about life itself. And people, they believe that they fall down their knees in synagogues and temples and churches and under trees and all kinds of places. And they believe that they're doing this kind of thing simultaneously and they can't see it. And of course, as a rule, nobody's falling their knees unless they got a complaint. Something's wrong anyway. And so, by the act of them being in a church or a temple somewhere, they're already expressing a complaint with the company. Because they wouldn't be there lighting a candle or doing whatever that stuff is that people do in those places, and to go in there and make signs and to put on hats and beanies and to kneel down. They're there. They're storming in the boss's office saying, hey, goddamn, this thing's, again, I'm here. Of course, they do it and they're quiet and all that and they're reverent. They do that. They storm in the office, and as soon as they go in this church or this place of worship, that's a sign that they're mad at the company or they wouldn't be there. So they do that. And then they go, would you help me? You understand? So what ordinary people believe, of course, is the way it's supposed to do, but they believe that they're going down and making some of these kind of religious signs in a place and kneeling down before some God, and what they're doing is, kneeling down and doing that. That's because what they're doing is expressing abject, unconditional displeasure with the company. And then saying, hey, help me. All right, if there was this old guy with a beard, the boss, and he thinks, well, help you what? You just come in here and say, fuck me in the whole life. What is it you want? Remember back in the city I pointed out to you, he has almost no recourse, none, but to fire you. And yet people think I keep asking for help. I've lit God knows how many candles, contributed so much, and I don't get any help. What do you expect? Take it back to the parallel that I drew you that is not invalid at the city level. If you're just going in and continually storm in the office and just express your blanket disapproval with the operations of the company and your job, which is what people are doing all the time about life. Not just specifically, you may have one specific that you think, well, that got me started. When they sold me that piece of rinky-dink junk and charged me $20, yeah, that got me mad. But hell, it went from that to that little flashlight not working to you thinking, goddamn, life's a pain. I'm so sick of life. It's shoddy merchandise, shoddy service. Work your ass off, and what do you get out of life? What if there was a boss somewhere? And of course there is, but not an old man sitting there in a beard in an office. And it hears this. What recourse does it have? And you leave and think, well, maybe they'll make some changes. What changes? You didn't tell him nothing. You went there and hollered, for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, all you did was attack the company. And tacitly, your position. That is, I'm sick of this. I'm sick about being a part of it. And then you leave and you think, well, maybe this will help things. Put yourself back here, the boss. What are you going to do with this kind of information, this kind of complaint? What is it they want me to do? Those people will be better off somewhere else. I don't know what the hell he's raving about. Well, I know this. I know he says he doesn't like anything about the job. So what can I do about that? You see, to let him go, what's the alternative? So, all right, you run the company, that kind of thing. There is no alternative. That's what I'm suggesting to you. And look at the way you treat life. Not in just some spiritual way, but look at the way that you entreat life intellectually. Acting as a continual critic when I've told you over and over again that you shouldn't, and if there wasn't laws against it, those of you who had any promise, I'd of course taken my pistol and beat the shit out of you around the head. But every time you criticize life, you're making a blanket indictment about your job. And what you're asking to be, I'm not trying to scare you, but you're asking to be fired. That's the only thing left. I don't mean that you'll get fired any sooner than you would, and instead of fired, I assume you can read buy the farm, bite the bullet, go in the ground, get cut down. I'm not referring to being faster. It just may happen and you not understand it any better. You at least look at the other way. You're at least not going to be privy to any help. Because how can the boss help you if you go in this blanket indictment and dissatisfaction with the whole operations of the organization, including your position therein? If that's what you're presenting to life, just intellectually, what do you expect back? How is it you walk in here on some nights? I don't take it personally most of the time. But when I see that you come in and you're still dragging in the complaints of life, and I have to go through all these hysterics, histrionics, and my wide range of emotions and gestures and jokes and humors and tap dancing, and in a sense it's trying to shock you out of what have you brought in here that you're still dragging in your criticism, your complaints of life. Of course, as far as you're concerned, we're back to this kind of distorted, from a revolutionary view, approach that you think, well, by coming here, I'm kind of registering my complaints and looking for help. But if you're still registering and bringing in the complaints that, hey, fuck life in general, and boy, I like the way you talk about the city and ordinary intelligence because that's what's driving me nuts. That ain't driving you nuts. And you can't complain about that place. It is not driving you nuts. The city is not crazy. The city is not nuts. The city is not a bad company. Well, all right, instead of me saying it's not a bad place to work, let me put it to you this way. It's the only job in town. So you might as well look at it as being a decent job because you got no other choice. You're going to work for the company, and you complain loud enough, long enough, what I'm telling you is, forget the boss. Forget the kind of information I'm trying to put through. I'm not the boss, I don't mean that. But forget that you're going to receive help from somewhere more complex, somewhere up the ladder. What kind of help do you get when you just go in and all you do is rant and rave about the operations of the company, and indirectly that your position therein? There's nothing can be done for you. If your hormones had been a little more vitriolic, I guess you wouldn't be here, and you could have been a professionally paid, perhaps semi-famous critic. And then I could have read about you instead of sit here and look in your face and read about you. Well, I found out we just got rabbit ears. I mean, 2. We're out of tape. Those of you out of town, I don't know if you've noticed, but you're out of town.